Today, we are gathered to learn about China's national park system, about conservation efforts in China. Now, some of you may be surprised to even learn that China has a national park system. And if you know something about it, it's likely that you, like me, learned about it from our guest speaker today, Kyle Obermann. Kyle has written about the national parks for South China, for National Geographic, and for other publications. Now, these parks are large. I know from Kyle's writings that they're about 2/3 the size of the US park system. But I've learned a lot more from Kyle, from the presentations he's made and through his social media and other writings. It's really impressive what China is trying to accomplish, but also the various aims that differ from those in the United States and elsewhere. So our guest today is Kyle Obermann, who is an award-winning photographer. He's a terrific writer. He's usually based in Chengdu in southwestern China, but he's coming to us today from Hong Kong. He works with both private companies and nonprofits, as well as with public sector agencies. He's done so much to teach about the environmental situation in China. And one of his taglines on one of his social media accounts is, protect the environment, speak Chinese, things like that. Kyle studied at St. Olaf College in Minnesota, the University of Otago in New Zealand, and at Beijing University. It's a great pleasure to have him with us today. Kyle, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Clay, for that wonderful and fascinating introduction. It seems like you know much about the United States National Parks as well, and I agree, it is one of our best ideas that has inspired national park systems around the world. And I've been very honored in the last couple of years to be following China's national park system. As some people may know, this was really a very new idea in the last decade or so that really caught hold in the Chinese government. In 2013, the idea was first proposed within the Chinese government, and it wasn't until 2015, 2016 when they actually began the effort to create their first national park. So for me, it's been an incredibly exciting time to be doing this work because, as I say, if you could have been in the US 100 years ago when the first national parks were being built, what a fascinating time that would have been. What a chaotic time. What a time of opportunity and of challenge. And I think that is really what we see defining China's conservation movement right now. I think in the last 10 years, we've never seen more resources poured into conservation, but also more of challenge and of kind of two forces meeting versus development and conservation. And how do you balance the two? So without further ado, I'll jump into today's talk, run you through some of the places and stories that I've been to, a look at why China's building national parks, what these look like, and then also just using some of my photos to bring you on kind of a virtual tour across China, some of the places I've been, and the incredible stories of local conservationists there who are doing great work. And then we'll open it up for questions. But first, I want to start with a short game, a short little question, just to keep everyone, make sure everyone's there listening. So I'm going to show you two pictures. Okay, this is one photo. Here's another photo. And I want you to guess which photo is the US and which is China. You can just guess to yourself. We'll see what you get here. All right, so the photo on the left is actually in Gansu, no, sorry, not Gansu, sorry, Shanxi, China. And the photo on the right is, of course, Antelope Canyon in the US, right? So I think there are a lot of similarities within Chinese landscape. And it's very fascinating for two countries that have so much indifferent these days, so many differences. We also have a lot in common, and I think that mainly being our landscape and our environment. There are so many kind of, whether it's prairie or canyon, it's quite incredible to see the differences and the similarities between our landscapes. And this is a story that's not really been told, right? I think right now in the media we're focusing on our differences, but I think climate and environment is something where we can and have to cooperate on. But it's very interesting when you look at China in the media and how it's portrayed, especially with the environment. And I think also it has some negative effects on how we envision China's conservation and how we act, right? So if you Google China's environment, no surprise, bunch of pictures of smog. I lived in Beijing in 2014, kind of at the end of the smog apocalypse era, but it was smoggy and it was hard to breathe. But if you show people China's landscape on Google Images, right? If I just, this is my non-academic way of testing what people think. Okay, China's landscape, well, it's a lot better, right? People kind of associate, okay, green, at least the color green pops up. You have natural beauty. But there's also a problem here in that all these landscapes are Eastern China. They're all, you have the Avatar Mountains, you have Guilin, you have some rice paddies. But it's almost as if you Google U.S. landscape and all you got was, New York, right? It wouldn't be reflective of the West, all of the West of the U.S., which has, some of our most incredible resources. Again, people don't associate China with wilderness. And if we aren't associating China with wilderness, then a lot of that work focuses on, well, what are we missing? What is the story that we're missing? What are the chances to support local conservation that we're missing? But, to the credit of the West, it's not just us who get it wrong. China also gets this wrong too. This is a photo from the China National Park and Nature Reserve website run by an NGO. And this is the About Us page. And there's a beautiful photo, lovely banner photo, love it. But it's of a Norwegian fjord. It's there's a confusion. What is China's wild? What does it look like? What is a Chinese national park, right? I think people back home don't know, people in China don't know, what does China's wild actually look like? So that's what my work focuses on, and taking photos of just some of the most incredible places I've ever been to, like these. And living in Chengdu, most of my work deals with the mountain areas in southwest China and also on the Tibetan Plateau, where you have the stories of people and nature combining to live together. So just to give you a brief intro into China's conservation and why and where it's happening. This is a map of China, of course, and there's a black line, which I'm sure that many people who have been on more of these talks with the USC China Institute can guess what the black line is. It's the Heihe Tengchong line. It divides China east and west, because in the east, basically, you can draw the line, and population density, economic, education levels, it's all higher to the east, which is not much news. But this map is actually showing concentration of mammal species diversity. So in this green area, you have the red, and the red has up to 32 different mammal species. So all of China's biodiversity, or at least most of it, is right to the west of this line, which means that one, okay, it is in Western China, but two, it's not far in Western China. It's actually right on the line where people and nature meet, at the edge of the Sichuan Basin, going into the Tibetan Plateau, northwest Yunnan, and Sichuan there. So most of my work is in this area, and most of China's national parks are in this area as well. But China's nature reserves, which form the backbone of national parks, have been going on since 1956. So this is a short background of what has been happening. So in 1956, China made its first nature reserve in Guangdong province. Since then, up until about 1992, so my generation was born, it was kind of a slow growth period, they say. But around the 90s, the nature reserves exploded until we get to around 2019, where China has now protected 18% of its total land mass, which exceeded the actual targets by 1%. Actually, if you look at percentage-wise, they've actually protected more land than the United States. But, with any explosive growth, you also have problems in many ways. But it has been an incredibly ambitious journey that China's been on to protect its land through the nature reserve system. And the next final stage of these protection efforts are the national parks. China talks about this idea of a protected area system with national parks at its center, right? So this new national park phase that has been going on since 2015 is basically aimed at fixing the problems of the super fast growth period. This explosion of nature reserve creation Now they're looking at, okay, what were the problems we created? How can the national park system fix that? When we look at where these national parks are concentrated, and I'll share a map of the national parks in a little bit, but this is just a fascinating map as well that I like to share. This shows Chinese wilderness areas in the yellow. This was a great research project done with collaboration from Steve Carver in the UK and Cao Ye and Yang Rui from Tsinghua University for the National Parks Research Institute over there, and also the Department of Landscape Design and Urban Planning. And they looked at, okay, what wilderness areas exist in China and what areas are protected. And so you actually see that, wow, there's actually a lot of yellow unprotected wilderness areas in China. You can see. And the protected wilderness areas, well, of course, you have the Sanjiangyuan and the Kekesili in the Qinghai Tibet Plateau over there. But really, in the east, again, not much wilderness. Most of the actually nature reserves aren't actually categorized as wilderness, which may surprise you, but it's actually because there are a lot of people living within these nature reserves. This is a topic for another talk some other day, but Chinese land right issues, a lot of times in a nature reserve or near it, the villagers will have a collective owned land and the state will own land as well. So if you're trying to protect a forest as the government, you have to navigate around the village's collective land and actually bargain with them to get to conserve. And that's actually one of the problems that the national park system is now facing. But when you have such an explosive growth of nature reserves across China with so much wilderness areas, you have government inefficiencies. And this is in Chinese, but if you read Chinese, you can maybe get what it's getting at. But every colored dot there, I think there's 12. Yeah, there's 12. So these are 12 types of protected areas in China, right? It's not just nature reserve. Your national landscape area, your national scenic area, your national forest park, you have your national, wetland, your national geologic park, right? If you've been to China, you've probably seen a lot of these places you've driven through, and they're just spread out. But as you can see in the map, if I could zoom in, unfortunately it's not very high quality, if I could zoom in, what you would see is that a lot of these dots are actually right on top of each other. So to take some of China's most famous places like Zhouzaigou, if you've ever been to Sichuan, one of the most famous locations, it's actually a famous scenic area, a national nature reserve, and a national forest park. And all of those different delegations of its status are actually managed by different government bureaus. So that's when you get into big problems here, because a lot of these nature reserves are traditionally governed by 2 to 3 different government departments across wide swaths of area. Well, for example, the giant pandas, the habitat of the giant panda in Sichuan at least is spread out between, I think, around over 80 different nature reserves on different levels. You have the national level nature reserves, the provincial level, and the county level. So a lot of times resources are split, government practices are folded on top of each other, and there's a very severe lack of communication and coordination between nature reserves, especially in species with the same habitat. So the national park system, in effect, has really been designed to counter that. And so these are the first 10 national park pilot projects, which began in 2015-16. They used to be said they were due to be completed in 2020, but I think COVID probably slowed that down. So now they're talking about being completed this year, which is unsurprising. I think, again, Clay touched on the 100th year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of things are finishing up this year. I think it'll definitely, also around the COP15 in Kunming, it should be announced then. I know that these first 10 pilot parks are right now, they've finished their final kind of auditing phase by a third party designed in China with experts. And so here they are. So you have the Giant Panda National Park, again, like I said, it conglomerates around 70 different nature reserves. You have Sanjiangyuan National Park, many times the size of Yellowstone. And you have very small national parks like Qinjiangyuan and Wuyishan in eastern China. And these are very interesting because they aren't necessarily new, they're more of upgrades. These parks actually existed, you could already go visit them, but they weren't a national park status. And that means that, so in 2018, China actually created the National Park Administration. under the Forest and Grasslands Bureau. So now all of these national parks are centrally managed under the central government National Park Administration. So that's really the big difference. In some of these parks, not much land area has been added per se, but it's more been an administrative streamline. And that's very important to know and to think about. A lot of these other national parks too, the key issue they focus is on poverty alleviation. Last year in 2020, as probably a lot of you know, China announced that it won the war to eliminate rural poverty, right, which is an incredible step. And the national parks were very closely tied to that. Most of China's rural poverty and rural poor live close to nature reserves. I think 99% of the people living around these nature reserves are actually usually rural poor. And so the national parks are really focused on how to give these people different incomes and livelihoods, right? In the past, a lot of these locals, they earn their livelihood from, forestry or poaching. But if you're going to make a national park or a nature reserve and you outlaw poaching, the question becomes, well, what alternative do you give these people? Because frankly, they're still going to poach unless you give them other means of livelihood. And there's no amount of enforcement you can do to stop someone from trying to earn their livelihood. So you've seen the rise of ecotourism in many of these areas. In Sanjiang National Park, actually every single Tibetan family within the park, nomadic family, can have one of their family members become a ranger and work for about 1,800 renminbi a month. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's way above China's rural poverty level. So each national park is incredibly different. But we'll touch on some stories from them today. But I wish we had time to talk about all of them, but I'll take you on some stories. But one last chart before we get into more photos. And this is kind of what Clay touched on, which I found surprising, but also nature reserve funding in China has actually decreased proportionally as well. From 1999, this is the amount of US dollars spent per square kilometer of national nature reserves. And in China, it's decreased from 113 US dollars to 30 US dollars. Very interesting. I didn't know the trend was similar in the US, but in China, it's perhaps even more severe. And again, that's because if you add all that area from 1999 to 2014, if you're adding all that area to get to 18%, you're going to have budget deficits. But the new national park system after 2014 has really, really increased the funding towards that. So let's go into analysis. Let's go into what is out there. We'll first warm over the video. This is one of my favorite creatures found in the Giant Panda National Park, taken on infrared camera in a nature reserve that I work at. It's a lovely creature, so I'll play the video. I wonder if anyone has seen this creature before. It's the takin. It's a class 1 protected species in China. Really funky, kind of big nose, kind of rambling around. Actually, kind of the genetic cross of a mountain goat and an antelope, but they are found commonly in giant panda habitats, ranging on these ridges. And they actually usually travel in large herds, and they can be really essential to actually forging paths. And so a lot of times when rangers who are in the Giant Panda National Park doing research on pandas or stopping poachers will actually follow takin trails because they tend to be the biggest kind of herds in the area that really carve out a good trail to follow. In the same habitat, of course, you have snow leopards. Yes, you have snow leopards and pandas sharing the exact same habitat. And these are two photos also from infrared cameras in Wolong National Nature Reserve, also close to Chengdu, part of the Giant Panda National Park. These photos I thought were so surprising when I first saw them. But here you go, the exact same infrared camera location, and snow leopards and pandas living together at about 3,000 meters. So the only country in the world, of course, has pandas, but pandas and snow leopards living together, wow. The incredible biodiversity, only a couple hours away from a city of 20 million. You get both of these. Of course, you have the snow leopard's favorite prey. In this photo, I think there are 11 mountain goats, or what is called blue sheep. And today I've never had in any Zoom or any live someone ever find them, so I'll just show them to you here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yep, there you go. So here you go. Blue sheep, the favorite prey of snow leopards. Again, the wildlife is incredibly suited to their landscape and environment and to adapt. But one of the biggest threats still is poaching. Like I said, it's quite lucrative on the black market. And what does a poacher look like? Well, it's quite interesting because guns are illegal in China, at least for personal use and sale. So the gun they carry, it looks like it was from 50 years ago. And it's still, this is a poacher his photo was caught on an infrared camera, actually. And you can see actually in one hand, he has wire traps, and then he has this animal fur actually on him. And then he's kind of walking through the nature reserve. And this is how they hide their gun. This is a ranger inside the national park, Yu Jiahua, 70 years old, and he stops poachers with his patrol every day. He's actually organized 500 villagers in the giant Panda National Park to patrol these mountains to stop the poachers and protect the species. Incredibly difficult terrain, some of the hardest terrain I've ever been on. The Taihao Mountains National Park is actually, it's not in the pilot project, but there's been some rumor of this becoming a national park, and this is actually right to the western side of Beijing. You have the Taihao Mountains. Again, incredible area. Beijing is not just a big metropolis, it's also has great outdoors. A little better than Shanghai, so I know there's always a Beijing-Shanghai rivalry, but I always kind of side on the side of Beijing because we have the bigger mountains over there. But these are actually some volunteers who I worked with who were searching for the North Chinese leopard, which used to actually be in Beijing in as late as 2005. And it's still in Hebei and Shanxi provinces around Beijing. But I was on a patrol with them within the proposed national park to also help survey the leopard species. The Galagon Mountains, again, this is potentially a new national park. Actually, no, I think this is not an original pilot park, but now I think this has been approved as another national park in China. So when I say there were 10 originals, yes, there were 10, but there are lists floating around online of 66 new ones coming. So China speed, you have more coming soon. So this is the Galagon Mountains. This is a ranger. He's actually climbing this tree to look at a climate monitoring station up on the tree canopy because they protect some of the species of the last Skywalker gibbons in China. The Skywalker gibbons were discovered in 2017 as a new species. There are less than 250 left within China in the Galagon Mountains, and they're some of the most incredible species. They have an incredible call, which really, if you've ever heard it, will change your kind of forest experience. And they actually, gibbons in China used to be found way, all the way up in Chongqing and along the Changjiang, the Yangtze River and the gorges there. But are now the gibbons, Changbian in China, they're very confined to some corners of Yunnan, of Guangxi, of Hainan, where there's, I think, 33 Hainan gibbons left in the world. Also a new national park in Hainan now because of that. And China has also done lots as far as river conservation. I think it was beginning of 2020, if not the end of 2019, but I think it was last year actually where China announced that it was putting a 10-year ban on all fishing on the Yangtze River. Which is, again, incredibly aggressive. I think Judith Shapiro in the US, she had a new book called Coercive Environmentalism. And it's the idea of, authoritarian governments having greater power to just put down rules and laws for the environment and the costs and benefits of that. But to imagine a country like the US saying, 10-year ban on fishing on, the Mississippi, it's an incredibly strong policy statement. So this fish here, these are patrollers from a local group in Yibin, Sichuan, who work to protect the Yangtze River sturgeon, also an endangered species, which is basically boosted by population releases in the wild. And the Yangtze River sturgeon can't be fished, but it can be farmed. And so it can be eaten. You see this on menus all the time. But it's quite an interesting case because when in China's wildlife protection law, which was updated at the beginning of this year and actually doubled right, which is great news. There are now 900 species in China which are protected. But a lot of these species still have asterisks by their name, which means that they can be farmed. So you can't poach them from the wild, but if you farm the river sturgeon, then they can be sold and eaten. But the problem there is with a lot of these species, it's very hard to tell when you go to these farms, how did this population start? Was it, were these specimens bought from another farm, or were they caught from the wild, put in the farm, and then bred, right? It's that's the loophole with a lot of these policy problems, is that when you allow any kind of domestic consumption of wildlife, even if you say, well, this has to be farm raised, who's going to check that, and how do you audit that? That is still a question that exists. In Shennongjiang National Park, again, incredible landscape, incredible rangers. Again, a lot of the work I do in China is with the rangers because they form the backbone of the national parks and the nature reserves. Now, these aren't rangers like you think of in the US. They're not, park rangers with their fun hats and their badges that come and, give you a tour and say, do this, don't do that. Most of these rangers are local villagers. They are not engaged in ecotourism. Their main job, again, is back in the scientific research of the parks. So, they're putting in infrared cameras to study species. They're changing batteries, every month and changing SD cards. And they're also, again, preventing poachers, educating locals about the national park, preventing poaching, and surveying the area. Surveying the area includes life-risking activities like this when he's climbing this cliff. But also in Sanjiangyan National Park, where you have the Tibetan Plateau, which is warming 3 times as fast as the rest of, it's warming 3 times faster than the global average, which has been obviously brought devastation to many of the glaciers over there. But also incredible efforts of the locals to monitor it. So here are 2 Tibetan nomads. I say nomads, but they live around the base of this mountain called Amnimachi at 6,000 meters. And they do migrate between their summer and winter and fall pastures, but every spring and fall, they take time out of their work to climb up to the glacier, carrying the world's longest tape measure. And they're measuring actually the glacier with a tape measure to see its retreat. It's quite interesting. And actually this glacier right here is retreating at about 30 meters per year. So, very sobering, quick retreat. Again, Qinghai is one of those beautiful places I've been, the Sanjiangyan National Park. You can't beat it. You really can't. It is truly one of those beautiful places. Harbors such biodiversity, not only of wildlife, but of poppy species. This is a rare poppy only found in a mountain range, one small mountain area of Qinghai called the Jiuzhi poppy, the Jiuzhi Luwenhao, and protected by conservationists and actually Buddhist conservationists, Tibetan monks who actually left their monastery to start their own conservation groups within this area. This is actually also part of their association started by these Tibetan monks. Again, they've organized locals to go up into the mountains to collect data on the glaciers and measure its retreat. As you can see, the glacier turns black over the summer now because so much of the sediment and the dirt and the rock left over from melt lies on top of the glacier. And of course, as you know, if you've been in a black shirt versus a white shirt in the summer, black shirts are hotter, right? They absorb the heat, so the glacier melts even faster. And we also found these bird species that were dead on the glacier, probably from a freak storm on the glacier in that area. And this is showing the melt there. They paint the melt on the rocks there of the year by year, the retreat of the glacier. So you can see it very visually in these areas. So that's the last short story I'll share today, because I want to have time to just open up to questions and discussions with Clay and with anyone else. But that's just a very quick visual tour of what is going on in China. Of course, there are so many stories. Within the national park, there are 650,000 people living inside the national parks I shared. So this is a big story, and it's a story about people and nature and how these things come together. But it's also about facing the threats that uniquely present us and face us in the 21st century, namely, which I would say is climate change. And as climate restricts the habitat of many species and reduces glaciers and reduces habitats, giving species and animals greater opportunity and land to roam and to migrate is going to be an incredibly important step towards ensuring that these species survive and mitigating the effects of climate change. So national parks in China are also focused on expanding this area, of expanding wildlife corridors and making sure that species and humans have greater resilience to a changing climate. So Clay, I'll turn it back over to you and we can open up for some discussion.
No, that's terrific. I've been looking forward, Kyle, to your presentation for quite some time. Thank you for this sweeping coverage and these stunning photographs. That visual evidence that you provided there at the end about the retreating glacier is really stark, right? The kind of difference that's made. You hit on so many different topics, and we've got so far a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. I want to encourage the audience to go ahead and use that Q&A button to submit questions. Before we get to those questions, and we're committed to bringing those in, I wanted to raise a question about, why has China's, this environmental effort taken hold? What are the forces here? What is the constellation of politics, economics, social awareness? What's pushed this forward?
Great question, Clay. I think there's a book response that could probably be written to that. But I think let's see. I think the nutshell answer, right? I think is one. China did realize what it was doing to its environment, and it realized the economic costs. And I think we saw that. I think most visually with smog, right? It really started to realize, wow, there's an economic cost of livelihood and industry to smog, and also kind of a worldly soft power image that's being affected, right? So then they really turned the boat around. They're still doing it, but you really saw this paradigm shift in how they dealt with smog, at least in Beijing, or at least in the high visibility areas. So I think they did realize that we have to conserve our natural resources. I think in Yunnan, I think it was about 20, 30 years ago, right? There were massive floods, and that was caused by deforestation from the Maoist era, right? So I think they started to get an idea of, we can't really do this and sustain a population of 1.4 billion. So I think that was the impetus. But I think also the current leadership has really also been, really thrown weight behind it. Xi Jinping, he has this phrase that he's coined and is now just plastered over everywhere in China. It's in China, this 如水青山就是阴山金山, right? Mountains of green and beautiful waters, and mountains are like mountains of gold and silver, right? This phrase that no one really knows how to translate perfectly, but it's long and it's a tongue twister, but it works, right? So they're and it's a double phrase. It means that mountains, the nature is invaluable, but it also means that nature is valuable because it has a monetary value of economic return. So it's it's both. It's the evaluation of nature by economics, but also in an invaluable sense. But I also will definitely say that this is so linked again to poverty alleviation. Right? You can't take it away, and because the most poor, we're harming the wildlife as far as poaching. And the story I showed, touched briefly upon with the old ranger with the bullet casing in his hand, Yu Jiahua, in the 70s and 80s. The way the villagers poached, they would go up in the mountains in teams of 3. 5 people would set fire to the forest. 2 people would be on top of the ridge with guns. Fire burns upward, so it burns up the forest. The animals run upward, out of the forest into the alpine layer, and the poachers wait with their guns to shoot them. Right, so that's what they were looking at. And if you give so many different livelihoods, they're not going to do that, right? There are easier ways to make a living if only you give them that. So again, I think China, it was kind of waiting to get to a development stage where it could handle all these issues. It could both raise people in the urban areas and in the poor areas out of poverty. And now that it kind of has the power to do that, it's been really throwing its entire weight behind it. And I do think it's also a soft power. As far as politics goes, you see these kind of, a COP, right? It's so excited for COP15, Convention on Biodiversity. It's throwing in tons of resources to doing that. But also realize, I think like the US realizes, we need to conserve our cultural and our natural heritages. This is not just going to help us, but also helps the world see us in a better light.
Yeah, no, that's a great response. And you've tied together things connected to my next question, which is about, these places, while defined as wilderness, are homes to, you highlighted that hundreds of thousands of people. And many of these folks have not had access to the same educational and economic opportunities, those sorts of things. And so the program overlaps. But is there a risk in, the easy thing to do is to take some of the places closer to urban settings, build good roads to them, and let the tour buses flood in. Tour buses and every SUV, coming that way from Chongqing and Chengdu and all these other places. Is there a danger that these places might get overloved? How are those decisions being made?
Again, great question. It keeps me up at night. I don't want to see these places overrun. Again, in China, the population is 4 times as big as the U.S. So if our parks are getting overrun, oh my gosh, right? It's really easy in China to get frustrated when you go to these places, any kind of place, whether it's the Avatar Mountains or any tourist site, like, wow, it's overrun. Well, they have 4 times the population. So that is a tough question. But I do think that with the pilot parks, with what we've seen, especially the more remote ones, so for example, Wuyishan, Tianjiangyuan in eastern China, those are already set up for tourist infrastructure. But Sanjiangyuan, right, this massive park, I think 3 times the size of Yellowstone, mostly wilderness area, how is that going to happen? Now, the parks are divided into 2 areas. You have the strict core zone, which is basically no one can be there, and the locals that are there are getting what they call ecological migration. They're basically getting packages to move to another area, which is actually a surprisingly few amount. Then there's an outside zone, which is kind of the more, okay, there can be ecotourism, people can live here, sustainable use zone. Now, in Sanjiangyuan, they actually had their first official national park tour group allowed into it on the May 1st holiday this year. It was 12 people, and they had to take a test to go, actually an ecological knowledge test. Okay, that's cool. I wonder what happened if we did in the US. That'd be interesting. And right now, again, it's in the fledgling stage. So we will see what happens. Right? Only time will tell. But only 2,000 people are allowed into Sanjiangyuan a year in the national park. So as a percentage of 1.4 billion, I'm not a mathematician, but that's pretty small. So I would say that actually in some instances, at least what we're seeing now, I think that China is actually more on the other side, where it's almost being too cautious in a way. In one sense, you can't be too cautious when it comes to protecting nature. But what is a national park? Is it a nature reserve? Is it just to say this place can't be touched? Or is it in the US where it's really a national heritage? It's for the people, by the people. And right now in China, I think they've gone very strict at first. And I think time will tell how they open up, and what kind of ecotourism opportunities will be there. But every park's going to look different, depending on their infrastructure. Again, Hainan National Park, it's home to the last of 33 of these gibbons. So I think that's going to be a very sensitive area. But the giant Panda National Park, it already has 10 ecotourism bases because it's right in Sichuan. There are 60,000 people living within that national park. It's right there. And so you have school trips going there on the weekends. It's so easy to access, right? So time will tell. But right now, what I've seen in most of these national parks is that actually they're being very conservative. And I can't see it looking like the US system as far as camping trips and, lines of tourism, traffic jams waiting for bears, right? In Yellowstone. Maybe that'll be the future. But optimistically, I think they are going slowly, but, we will see.
Well, and it's obviously easier to loosen up rather than tighten down.
Yeah.
If one of these fragile environments is damaged, the recovery period is more than a single tourist season often. And so that's a consideration. Now, one thing that you mentioned was this notion of ecological migration or ecological relocation. We had a graduate student at USC Annenberg work on this topic, and it's something, of course, of great sensitivity when you're talking about ethnic Tibetans, for example, on the Qinghai Plateau or wherever, being compelled to move. And then, opening up maybe opportunities for other people, but they themselves forced out of their homeland. To what extent is that at play? Do people talk about that issue as well? Who has to move?
Good question. I can only know the official numbers right now. It's the only thing I can quote. So, as I mentioned before, 650,000 people within the national parks. I think total out of all the national parks, less than 10,000 are supposed to be ecologically relocated. Those are the numbers in the reports. I haven't been there in the last 2 years or so to see all throughout Shandong yet. In some areas, it's more than others. Again, it's in these core areas of the national park. In Sturgeon, it's less. So in the Tibetan Plateau, it's less because that's where you have the ranger programs where these rangers are actually being hired on. But for example, in the Chilean mountains, where there was actually a lot of mining, there's actually a lot more relocation there. It's a very touchy subject, I think, again, and how it relates to China's ethnic minority policies is a whole nother conversation as well. I think also as a foreign journalist and photojournalist over there, it's hard to go over there. And I actually haven't talked to anyone, for example, in Tilianshan, who has been relocated. Of course, I would love to talk to actually the students' research. I think that would be a fascinating collaboration. I'd love to see their research and what they've done. But, I think to their credit, at least, 10,000 in the grand scheme of things isn't that large compared to if you think how the U.S. national parks were built, and it's not to excuse any of it. It's not to excuse relocating 10,000 or, genocide of Native Americans. But I think they are trying to achieve a delicate balance. In the Giant Panda National Park, very, very, very few people are being relocated. But I will say one last thing in Shenzhen, there is the goal, in the report, they say in Shenzhen, I think that almost no people were relocated. When you look at their goals, they want a population decrease within the national park. So, I don't know, what, maybe it's a stimulus, maybe it's more the carrot and not the stick, but that's what the paper says. And again, I think the national park system in China is scheduled to be complete by 2025. And then, totally finish on a system-wide basis by 2035. So we're going to know a lot more. We are just looking at the tip of the iceberg of what is happening and how this is going to affect locals.
Thank you. I asked you earlier about kind of, who is pushing. And, anybody who spent time in China knows about the immense popularity of nature shows on Chinese television. Often these are foreign nature shows, right? National Geographic, Discovery, they, their programs are licensed and used in China. And of course, China's own television networks are producing some of these things. And through the popularity of your social media accounts, both in Chinese and in English, that there is an audience that people are interested in this. And I was wondering if you could say something about the place of protecting nature in popular media, films, television shows, that sort of thing.
It's the golden age, I would say, in China right now for nature and the popular society in that sense. I think you're seeing this transition from before content was from other places. Now it's become a star of the show. And that's part of the, it's part of national parks. It's part of the TCP's 100th birthday. It's like, let's just go full in and put resources. So now you have a lot of domestic content. The outdoors industry in China, which is another, group that I'm involved in. A lot of my work is with the North Face, and they sponsor a lot of my exploration in China. And not just the North Face, but domestic brands, hiking, backpacking. They're exploding in China in ways that you could not even imagine. Where, again, in Chengdu, where I live, you drive 3 hours and you can climb a 5,000 meter peak. That's higher than any peak in the continental United States. And people will fly from Shanghai, do this on a weekend, right? It's 15,000 feet. We're over here in Colorado complaining about, 14ers, and they're just flying in, So there's an enthusiasm now to see and experience the local environment, which is just incredible to see. And the resources are being poured into. Now, it's also being it's very interesting. It's a juxtaposition, like everything. One of the new potential national park sites, Geni, it's a mountain, a snow mountain, as they say in Chinese, out in western Sichuan. They actually closed off to hikers and backpackers. And the excuse was to prepare itself to become a national park. Again, it seems from the American mindset, when national parks are supposed to be places to backpack, it seems like, well, what? Like, wait, what? You're shutting everyone out, right? And I think, again, that's my fear, that they shut everyone out. But to their credit, there's also a very special lake in that area. And they started to build, actually, a metal walkway around the lake, as they do, right? And we're, overdevelopment, they're going to ruin it, And actually, they gauged, and the locals, they sent out surveys. Do you agree with this? And there was a big lashback, and one of the biggest lashbacks was, if you build this walkway, the drone photos are going to look bad. And because of that, they stopped building it, and now they're taking it down. So I was like, wow. One, like, they're actually listening to local feedback, and they're taking it down, which I'm not going to say this is, the standard in China, but wow, what a hopeful future it could be. And two, because of drones, who would have thought that, drone tourism, DJI is a Chinese brand. I think they're a lot more popular in China. Wow, because of people's wanting aerial photos, now we can serve something. So that's great. So it's very interesting to see how it's changing.
Yeah, the interest in going to these places, obviously is this double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's good for, the people who live there. It's good to get people out of the cities and maybe to experience this and to become advocates for preserving these things. At the same time, of course, you have, the folks who are, basically there for their selfie for Weixin, and, or the drone photos and things like that. And so you have that push and pull. We've got quite a few questions coming in, but one or two more questions, and then we'll get to those. The first is about your own work. You mentioned, your work with North Face, and we saw, in fact, one of the rangers wearing a North Face jacket, that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about how you set that in motion, what the objectives are, who gets what from these relationships?
Yeah, I think, I call myself a conservation photographer. And I think the difference between that and a traditional journalist or photojournalist is that I have a clear goal. I have a clear bias. My goal is to use my work to advance conservation, right? Like, that is my goal, and my bias is that I want to direct more resources into the bubble that is conservation. So with the North Face, one of my work projects in China has been called Explore to Conserve. And it's this idea of getting the outdoors industry in China and the conservation industry to connect and communicate and support each other, which in the US and Europe, I think they do a great job at it. In China, not so much. So for example, my work with the North Face, they come on as a kind of a CSR sponsor, where I would go to a lot of these ranger groups, and when I would shoot them, I'd also donate, North Face. What do they need? I mean, is it, jackets, shoes, tents, pants, sleeping bags? I donate North Face gear, and North Face would support me as kind of a North Face photographer in that way. And then I could take the photos, North Face could publish them and to their audience, and you get this kind of sharing of audiences. I think a lot of my work is thinking about, okay, not how to take a great picture, but how to get it seen by the right people. No matter how great your photo is, if no one sees it, if no one with power sees it, it really doesn't matter that much, right? So, photos and not put them in the same little conservation bubble, people who already care, but, kind of put them in outside. I get published in, outdoor exploration magazines in China, and I give talks at outdoor festivals in China. And because I really want to call into these people who are getting the most out of the environment as far as recreation value, I think we have the responsibility to put the most back in. So, and develop, and how do I get into these places? These places access, it's been very difficult, but it's also gotten better and better because for me, I found that working with local NGOs is key to building trust. I don't just trounce into a nature reserve one man with an American flag, I hope that, asking them to be let in. I'm let into these places from years of, relationship building and work with local NGOs that they can vouch for me. They can get me into these, areas. And then I'm working with the NGOs who I built trust. And, in 2017, China had this new NGO law, which of course really constricted a lot of what international NGOs can do. So a lot less of my work is with, the TNCs, the WWFs in China. It's more of the grassroots groups in China. Local NGOs are doing a great job. I'll say some. You can Google it. Shanshui. They actually have a Twitter account. It's SHANSHUI. A great account to follow. If they can keep up their Twitter, they do great work. Also, if you ever Google Cloud Mountain Conservation, they do great work with gibbon species. So that's two conservation groups. Encourage everyone here to look up, follow. They're some of the leaders in China's conservation scheme, and they've helped me a lot too. I'm indebted to them.
Well, as you say, this is hard-won credibility. You've been at this for some time. You are a known commodity. These different groups, they're going to be more open to you than they might be to somebody else who just says, look, I'm here. I've got this big sponsor, let me do this, in this space. When you work with one of these local NGOs or specific, task-focused NGOs, how do you make the approach, and how long does it take for things to happen? Because they too, of course, even though they may have credibility, they too have to work with local authorities to make things happen.
Good question. I think in anything, in any industry, right? I think it's networking is kind of a snowball effect. The more you do, the bigger name you have, which means the easier it is to do more. And then the more you do, and the bigger, it's the positive feedback loop. And that's really, I got my start in China working for Conservation International. And that's how I got, my first access to some nature reserves and my first stories. And, that was the pivotal moment of my first nature reserve, my first story. I did everything I possibly could with those photos, right? I put them everywhere I could. I published it where I could, and once you have that name, you can kind of get to another. So again, like anything, it's really a positive feedback. But also in China, I've done my best to kind of be a conservation influencer in that way. And my online presence in China is actually much larger than it is on English media. I've been on TV shows, for conservation, Chinese talk shows. I'm a vlogger over there. I actually do more video than photos these days because that's what, video is king all around the world these days. So, again, trying to bring a positive influence and, really, leaving a mark. It's not just coming in, taking some photos and coming out, but, really then looking back and saying, okay, what can I do with these photos? So I'm very honored to say that my photos have helped a lot of these forest rangers win awards, both within China and internationally. Now, they haven't won awards because of my photos, because of their work. But my photos have told their story, which frankly, no one has done. And part of the reason is not just hard to get access to these places, but the landscape the rangers are in. If you're not an athlete, if you're not, already like an extreme athlete in that sense, you're not gonna be able to document it. So my perspective is I want to use my athletic and my outdoors abilities to shine a spotlight on these people. And if that spotlight can help tell their story to help get them awards, that is what I want. And when that happens, that is both fulfilling to me, but also I think helps reinforce my image in China. I'm not just a journalist doing this to publish it. I really want to make sure that people are benefiting, and that's the hardest thing to do about my work, but it's the most rewarding thing to do about my work.
And so the ultimate brand that you're building is not your own. It's the brand of conservation, the brand of protecting this environment, and that comes through. And this is one reason why it's not just some of those rangers that have received awards. It's you've received awards in part through the photographs and videos that you have produced that have helped to educate. I wanted to shift, if we could, to the question of marine national parks. And there's some plans off the Shandong coast, to create a marine national park, and to tie that to a question that's come in from a distinguished scholar who's asking about, well, okay, it's great that China is protecting these areas and these species and seeking to, preserve them. But what about Chinese activities with regard to overfishing in the South China Sea or elsewhere? We know that there have been tensions with Indonesia, tensions as far as, South America regarding fishing fleets and things like that.
Great question. I think that there's no easy answer, and I don't think that right now it doesn't sound that great. But I think if we're going to put on our international relations caps, I think all great powers protect their land at home and then start to go elsewhere and do other things. So whether it's the One Belt, One Road, right? Okay, great. China's going to be carbon neutral by 2050, but they're investing in coal in other places. Well, is that really carbon neutrality? If your investment is from China, I don't know. I think the same will happen with marine. I think we need systematic changes, right? And this is more reflective of the global situation as a whole. China's marine national parks, great, perfect, wonderful, we love it. China's fishing fleets in the South China Sea or the Galapagos Islands, not so great, right? So what we actually need is a change of appetite, not a change of national park marine area, right? We need a change of maybe international sea policy, not just national parks. So if we're going down that way, right? A lot of us all see Seaspiracy, right? Very powerful movie. What we need is paradigm, diet change, lifestyle change, and in China, is that happening? Much slower than protected areas, right? I think protecting the sea, protecting the national park is hot. It's a buzzword. Impacting industry, impacting consumption, that's tough, right? No. So at least China has implemented, new regulations against wasting food, but trying to tell people to eat less beef when the U.S. eats more beef traditionally, trying to tell people to eat less seafood, when it's part of their local diets, that is going to be the challenge. So I'm very confident that the marine park will be successful. I am not that confident on the short term that we're going to see on a global level for any country a lot of regulation on international fishing. That I think needs to come from, local culture, individual change of how we relate to our diets and environment. Big problem.
Yeah, and you've had celebrity activism, with regard to certain species, shark fin, that sort of thing. So you've seen, at least in popular culture and out there's an awareness among some. But as you say, there are a whole host of other species that may be in jeopardy. And of course, China's not the only player in this. Rising incomes, it's a natural formula that people would want to, especially Chinese people, would want to eat better. And often that means more seafood, right? That sort of thing. Now, related to this question about international relations is another question that we have that's been raised by one of the audience members about border areas. And certainly China has a lot of border areas. It's got a lot of neighbors. And some of these border areas are ecologically sensitive. Yunnan, in Tibet, Tibet and some of these other areas.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the most recent conflicts was between India and China up in the Himalayas. And that, the fight over the Himalayas is a fight over water resources and other considerations. What is kind of the state of play in these border areas?
That's a very, very big question, and I don't think I studied international relations in undergrad, but it's been a while, so I don't think I have the authority to speak on a lot of those. But in conservation, right? I don't know about the India-China border clash necessarily. Well, I do know about it, that's not my area of expertise. But if we go to Yunnan and Laos, or China and Russia, that's where they have the Amur leopard and tiger national park, or the border of Laos and Yunnan. You have the Sichuan National Nature Reserve. These borders are, less sensitive politically. And so I think that does enable a lot of conservation cooperation there. And from the conservation perspective, what has been interesting to see is that as Chinese NGOs have gained more experience within China, now they're kind of exporting their expertise and models to these developing countries. So now Chinese NGOs in Yunnan are crossing the border to Laos to work with people in Laos who have no conservation experience. And they're helping Lao people, protect clouded leopards, which is very interesting, right? We think as, the West is conservation leaders, but now China, as far as developing nations and its neighboring nations, is becoming a conservation leader, especially I think, in the southeast of Asia, along those border states, with the NGOs going in and working with the people, similar to how they worked with the Chinese people 10 to 20 years ago. But yeah, a lot of borders, a lot of different things to be solved, but I think that is just, one small story and anecdote that I can share from my experience.
Now, thank you for that. Now we've got a few more questions, and one came from somebody who worked as a journalist for a long time in China. And she writes that, I wrote about supposedly the first national park in 2000. And rather than addressing that specific question, maybe you can help us go back, to that slide where you talked about these different level, maybe that's not the right way to different types of protected areas, and how they fit administratively into China's system. You already highlighted the question of land tenure, collectively owned land, these sorts of things. Administratively, who runs the show?
Yeah, I know. I love that question. I feel that journalists, I feel it makes me laugh. It's kind of crazy because I have been to many places that says national park, and you know what? Because in that graph where I showed up all those dots, all the many colored dots and the 12 different types, all those are, National Wetland Park, National Geologic Park, National Nature Reserve, National Forest Park. And when you go and visit, the sign is going to say, "Welcome to our national park." And that's actually where the confusion comes, is everyone's like, well, it's a national park, but actually there's no, at that time, especially in 2000, there was no National Park Administration. A lot of it was just one bureau. There was no, central governing body. And it was usually also really administered by local government leaders. So again, it wasn't on a national level. So that's really the difference is, yes, there were national forest parks or National Wetland Bureau, but that was maybe under the Bureau of Water Resources. It was not under any kind of national park model or actual thinking about it. It was a protected area. But now, again, in 2018, they created the National Park Administration, right? This whole new level of management structure. And so now that, you had all the, 80 nature reserves inside the Giant Panda National Park, which had different standards, right? They're still managed right now on different levels, whether it's, provincial and county. It's not like, every office has been moved to Beijing, but now the standards and the directives are coming from one central office. It's not just, we have this standard here in Pingwu County, and then, but we're, Sichuan level, so we have these standards and these resources. No, the standards now are the same across the board. And that's what makes a national park. as far as that goes. Is, where is the administration? Okay, it's in Beijing. That's where the standards are. And now they have, so you have the National Park Administration in Beijing. Now within the national parks, they have local national park bureaus now in Sichuan, based on district level. But again, it's not under the power necessarily of, or the standard, I would say, of the local government. It's really directives are coming down from Beijing and trickling down, which is quite standard. So it's a complicated administrative process, but I think half of the work of China's national parks has really been just administrative streamlining. They haven't added a lot of land, and that's critical to think about. The Giant Panda National Park, I don't think has added any land. It's just really taken all these crazy parks that have different names that were claiming this and that, and making sure that they're talking to each other. Because again, if you don't have the wildlife corridors, if this park is that standard, that park is this standard, and a panda wants to move, and this park says to build a road, well, that's going to be a problem. So, pandas don't care about the border of your nature reserve. They care about their habitat. And that's really why it's become streamlined and unified under one bureau.
That's a great explanation about, the ecosystems don't understand, administratively who they belong to, right? They are just buffeted by these things. But let's take what you've just shared with us back to one of the charts that you showed. To what extent is this centralization and standardization an unfunded mandate? Is money flowing from the center to meet these centrally mandated standards?
That's a great question. And honestly, I haven't seen too much public information about that or research. But I mean, yes, I think as far as if you look at the infrastructure that's being built and the investment and the hiring of local rangers and the funds that are being poured into it, I don't have any numbers as far as what that funding is, but I think that's also been part of the key issue is that because it's now, if you become a national park, right, I think there is a promise of you get X funding, which is why 66 other places are now applying to become national parks, right? Like it's, again, like everything in China, like if you can reach this level, well, it means that, I get more money to do my work. And, so I think everyone, and that's the risk, right? Like, does it become just a ploy for the local leaders to get more money to do their, to do something? Or is there actual standards showing how this money is spent? Again, I think it's a bit too early to see. It'll be interesting, but I think it definitely comes with a boost of investment, and that's going to definitely cause a lot of people to want it. And the challenge then that China's going to have is to manage this investment well. I think in 2018, there was a journal report published by the Chinese Academy of Sciences that said it's the only place, this wouldn't be in the media. It was by researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and they found that some of the national parks had been using the funds to really construct buildings that were, not environmentally safe, that didn't make sense as far as conserving nature, right? It was kind of an old style of Chinese ecotourism development. And the government stopped that. And they found that out because of actually satellite imagery, looking at the land use. And that was good, right? The government stopped that, but you saw the tendency, all right, here's your money. And then they said, okay, let's build this. And it's like, slow down. So this isn't reported about in the media. It's hard to find instances like this, but they are there. And we'll see what happens. It'll be, let's talk in 2 years and we'll go over what's happened.
Well, we're going to hold you to that. We definitely want you back. But one, as you illustrated, there are all kinds of ways to game this system. And being part of a 5-year plan to expand and protect and to do these kinds of things, well, we can get on board with that, and maybe we can also achieve some of our locally generated aims as well. We're going to have to wrap things up, but one of the questions that we have from the audience, and it's a great one, and that has to do, we've got another person who wants to ask about a famous tourist destination, Xishuangbanna, but I'd like to have you talk about, talk in response to one of the questions is, why rangers? Why have you spend a lot of your time and energy telling about their work, sharing their stories with not just Chinese audiences, but international ones. What was it that drew you in?
I think for me, it was the idea that when we think about conservation, right, we think of a photo of a snow leopard or a lion or an elephant, right? And that inspires us emotionally to become attached to that species and to want to protect it. But when I was in China beginning this work, I realized that there's something going on in the backstory here that's much bigger. It's not just these animals are wandering around happy and there's a fence around, 1,000 kilometers of square land. No, that's not how it works, right? Without the rangers, we would probably not have many of these species because poachers would have got to them. And B, we probably wouldn't know much about them because most of the scientists who are publishing their papers about these species are using data that they've helped direct, but are collected by the rangers who are monitoring the infrared cameras and the species, et cetera. So the science of conservation and the actual act of conservation is enabled by these rangers. And not just that, these rangers aren't just sitting in their office, they're risking their lives. They're the people with the lowest incomes, the hardest work, they're working rain, snow or shine, and leeches and cliffs and elevation. They've given up family time, and it's really life-risking work. I could share more photos, but some of the photos there's no space for error, right? You can't fall, you can't slip, and so for me, they've just become the most inspiring figures. Where they're risking their lives so that we can enjoy these species, right? The reason why we can look at cuddly panda videos online is because rangers have done the work. But we're not seeing cuddly ranger videos, right? So again, it makes no sense to talk about conserving the panda if we're not talking about supporting the rangers. So that's why I devoted my work to them, because I think their story is undertold. There's more than just beautiful animals out there. There's the people who are protecting them, and if we don't support the people, we can't support the wildlife. That's the bottom line.
Thank you so much for that answer. All of us, as a member of the human species, we're all benefiting from the work of these rangers, but we wouldn't know about that work weren't it for the stories that you and others have told. Friends, we're going to have to close things off, but I know that you've learned a lot, as I have, during this presentation by Kyle Obermann. I want to encourage you to go to his website, follow him on social media, either Chinese social media or international social media, and continue to learn about his work, trying to promote conservation and to document those efforts. Kyle, thank you so much.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Clay, for being such a wonderful host with such great questions. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for your questions and for following along. Any more questions, feel free to ping me on social media and we can talk more.